Welcome back, everyone. Please welcome Vivian Schiller, the Vice President and Executive Director of Aspen Digital, with our panelists, Caitlin Sarian, founder of Cyber Career Club and an influencer known as Cybersecurity Girl, Nicole Perlroth, author, investor, and venture partner at Ballistic Ventures, and Hutch Parker, producer at Hutch Parker Entertainment.
Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you very much. And now we're going to have a really, really interesting conversation about communicating about cyber. Now, in all of the time that I've been focused on cybersecurity during my 6 years at the Aspen Institute, I've sort of boiled down, to me, what I think are the communication issues around cyber broadly into two categories. One, a lot of people think it is a technology issue, like a hardcore, like tech only. And the other problem is a lot of people think it's not my problem, it's somebody else's problem. Now, I know all of the people, because you're here at the Cyber Summit and you know a thing or two, know that that is not true. And yet, you probably also know it's really hard to get people to care about cyber. But care they must, and we have three amazing folks who have found different ways to land those messages. And so let me just say a couple of more words about them, other than our wonderful voice of God delivered. So Hutch Parker, all the way at the end, is a producer of big grossing films. Patriots Day, I'm sure I've seen all these, with Mark Wahlberg, The Amateur, which was one of the favorite movies that I watched. I fly a lot. I did watch on an airplane, but I loved it, with Rami Malek. Logan, starring Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart, and a whole bunch of the X-Men franchise films. They are not just popular, but Hutch is also a big award winner, multiple Academy Award nominations, and many other audience awards and accolades. Next is Nicole Perlroth, who was a long-time cybersecurity reporter at the New York Times. She left in 2021 to go, as you put it, I'm using your words, inside the tent at CISA, now a venture partner at Ballistic Ventures, managing director of her own cyber fund. And crucially, for the purposes of this conversation, the host of the podcast To Catch a Thief, which is going to have its second season coming out soon, right? And finally, immediately to my right, Caitlin Sarian, otherwise known as Cybersecurity Girl. She has 2 million followers across platforms. Let me tell you, that is a lot of followers. I dare say you have more followers on TikTok than anybody probably in this entire summit. And she educates the public on online safety, cybersecurity careers, empowers women and girls to pursue STEM careers, which is amazing. And she's recognized as one of the most influential voices on cybersecurity education. So this is an amazing group. And like I said, they all have different ways of communicating. Nicole, I'm going to start with you because you come from sort of one of the more traditional cyber comms roles, which was you were a reporter. Reporters obviously share information that the public needs to know, but you are effectively a communicator. And during the time you were at the New York Times, you wrote a book called This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, in which you told me you were trying to straddle two audiences, which is people that know a thing or two about cyber and the general public to get them to care, which that person you refer to, or in your mind, right, is your mom, I guess, which is good. It's the proverbial mom, or in your case, maybe the real mom. So tell me what you learned about the audience in writing that book and trying to bridge those two audiences.
Okay, thank you for having me here today. It's awesome to be on stage here and to see so many familiar faces in the audience. I led cyber coverage at the New York Times for over a decade, and I always said that the New York Times should have 12 people covering this topic. We should have had someone on Chinese cyber espionage all day long. We should have someone on critical infrastructure pre-positioning. We should have someone on ransomware, someone on intelligence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there was only one person, me, occasionally in tandem, which was awesome with our intelligence reporters. The problem was that it changed every day. One day I was on Sony, the next day I was on Target, the next day I was on Snowden, the next day I was on China. Even if you were the most loyal reader of the New York Times, you would have had a very hard time following what was happening, why it was happening, and sort of the different equities, right? So I decided to write this book. And the book, when I went out to sell the book, the publishers all said, the ones that passed said, no, you have no donkey. And I didn't know what that meant. They meant you have no one carrying this narrative all the way through. And then it hit me, I'm the donkey. I'm gonna have to go out there and be the donkey and hold people's hands and walk them into this world of sort of the cyber arms race and how it's come for all of us. And so I did that, and it took me 7 years because I was straddling these two audiences. The highly technical cybersecurity crowd, which, forgive me, but they're a little bit nitpicky, to say the least. And then my mom. It was really important to me that my mom, who knows how to operate an iPhone most days, could understand what I've been up to. So that's why it took me so long to write the book. What I didn't realize, and this is, where I'll close here, is that it turns out that most members of Congress, most board members on Fortune 500 boards, really the leaders of our most powerful nations and private sector have my mom's understanding of cybersecurity. And it wasn't until I wrote this book for the layperson that they were inviting me into board saying, until I read this, I really didn't know what my CISO was trying to tell me. And that's when I realized, okay, this was the unlock, and just how important it is that we translate this for everyday people, including my mom.
Well, we're going to come back to that, particularly when we talk about your podcast, but just one quick follow-up question. What about the nitpickers? Were they okay with the book?
They were definitely not okay with the book at first. I think I always say, I felt like I was put through a washing machine on Twitter for a couple of months there. But in the end, the people, people kind of came back and said, okay, now I understand that maybe me harping on the fact you hyphenated the word 0 day is not necessarily productive to the larger conversation.
Yes. Focus on the donkey. I love that. Caitlin, so your audience, if I know you're on a lot of platforms, but largely on Twitter, that is not like the crowd or the demographic you usually think of as caring about cyber. So, and you must be reaching, I'm sure, also more younger people than some of the traditional cyber vehicles. So what have you learned about how to communicate that message and get people to care who are not necessarily the kind of people who would care?
Yeah, so I first started only on TikTok, which is, I know, it's crazy, cybersecurity on TikTok. But it was really to reach the next generation, because honestly, we talk about our parents getting scammed, but the issue is actually the kids are the ones that are inherently trusting technology. And actually, they're the ones getting scammed even more potentially than our parents, but they have no monetary value, so we really don't talk about it. And so my goal was to reach the next generation. And I'm a very interactive person, so if you ever talk to kids or any of your family members about cyber, how many times are they excited versus they roll their eyes, right? Everyone? They all roll their eyes? Yeah. Because they don't think that it relates to them at all. If you talk to me about astrophysicists, I would be like, I have no idea. I'm just going to tune out because this is a waste of my time and energy. But when you talk to them about something that's actually relatable, hey, that phone in your pocket that you're constantly connected to the internet, here are 3 things that you can do right now to start protecting yourself. Turn on auto updates. You can start teaching them how to use the password manager on iPhone. It's the little things, and it's the crawl, walk, run. So when we're in cyber, we're talking about the nitpicky, right? You start learning everything, and then you start becoming an expert, and you don't really think about what you had to learn to get there. But if we start thinking about, oh my gosh, when I first got into cyber, I had no idea how important passwords were until someone told me in very simple terms how it was relatable to my life. So I always go back to, similar to what you said, your mom, right? Would my mom understand this? And would she actually be able to take the steps to protect herself? Would she even find this relatable? I also say that to myself. I'm 10, 12, 15 years ago when I first started cyber, does this make sense to me? And it's really just making sure it's relatable, understandable, and actionable, because also the news a lot of times, they tell you crazy, scary things, but they don't teach you what to do to protect yourself or how to fix it. And I was really, really tired of that narrative, because honestly, a lot of people are getting numb to hearing, oh my gosh, there's another data breach, that they just start thinking privacy doesn't exist anymore, I can't do anything, my hands are up, I give up. But if you start teaching them and empowering them with simple tricks and tools and act as if, you were before you started your cyber career, that really helps them and it brings cyber back to reality, because cybersecurity starts at home. It does not start in corporate offices. If they're not doing the same things at home, they will not be taking that into the office and protecting themselves either. So it's not just for kids, it's for everyone, and it starts at home. And so that's what I kind of work on, of like, how can I make this relatable to everyday users? Because it is relatable to everyday users. It's not we don't really need that like cyber hygiene. It's not cyber hygiene. It's cyber routines. It's just the same as brushing your teeth every night because you know it's good for you in the long run. Few seconds a day, if you tweak a few things, you will be able to protect yourself. And that's what I'm trying to teach everyday people.
Well, I'm glad you're trying to move away from the term cyber hygiene.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
It's gross, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
But also, I think the point that you are making over and over again, which is there's something you can do personally, is so important. It's a good time for me now in that regard to plug the Take 9 campaign, which you'll be hearing more about this afternoon, which does the same thing. So just got to throw that in there.
I do teach them a lot at Take 9 a lot. I'm like, take 9 seconds before if you're going to open an email from people that you don't know, take 9 seconds and think, like, is it urgent? Is there something weird? Hover over the links.
Yeah.
It's not that hard to take 9 seconds, and it's very simple terms that people can understand.
What she said. Hutch, you are not a cyber guy.
Nope.
Yeah. So, but you are a storyteller. And again, I have to come back because truly one of my favorite movies that I watched in the last year was The Amateur, which is really one of the best cybersecurity movies I've ever seen. And I know that is probably not the way the studio sought to market it, but for me, that's what landed. So just talk a little bit about how you prepare for a film like that, and what does it tell you about sort of the state of cyber readiness? Now I'm going to make you sort of represent the whole industry in the United States from that movie.
First of all, I got to thank you. You're the first person to tell me that about the cyber representation of the film, so I'm very, very pleased to hear that. My colleagues here, Dan Wilson, and this is actually based on a book from the 70s, and it was a pretty notable spy thriller written by an author who had experience within the intelligence community, so it had a kind of verisimilitude and an authenticity to it that was appealing, but it's from the 70s. And in this particular story, it's a little like 3 Days of the Condor, if you haven't seen it. CIA analyst, wife is killed, he decides to break ranks to go seek justice. But it means he's on the run from the very agency he worked for, along with being hunted by the people he's going after. And so it involved a lot of tech and a lot of cyber tech. And we were not skilled enough, but we knew people, and some of whom are in this room, who would help us and guide us. And we drew on people, active duty intelligence community, as well as people just in the cyber world, to help us understand how do we better reflect the way in which the world today functions, given the level of cyber presence. Particularly, a lot of it takes place in London. Particularly in London, how would we execute this story? And it did require a fair amount of reinvention, as you might imagine. Although in many cases we found today's operatives have ways of moving through a city as heavily camera and photographed as London, and employed those techniques to try to do that. I think the other part of your question is tech is not an easy thing to dramatize beyond the most boring representation of people's fingers on keys and fancy screens that we can create digitally. Was how do we find ways to translate that into a human language? And that, frankly, in the movie resides more in the reliance on telling the story of a man's grief and his journey to process that grief first through revenge and then through acceptance, i.e. having nothing to do with tech, but allowing his technical proficiencies to facilitate a lot of his success, and that same proficiency is what kind of facilitates his redemption. So I'd say we tried to find a way to create a sort of cyborg, if you would, a tech story and a tech language and syntax expressed and represented through his human journey.
Yeah, it's a really great sort of revenge fantasy film. You know, two quick things I want to pick up on from what you said. One is, it's really, I mean, this is not just the case in filmmaking, although I can imagine in filmmaking. Imagery around cyber is so difficult. I mean, how many times are we going to see the shadowy figure in the hoodie hunched over a keyboard? In fact, the Hewlett Foundation actually commissioned artists a few years ago to come up with images that represent, commissioned artists to come up with images that represent cyber in ways that are not sort of the normal cliche. But also, I want to ask you about, in both the amateur and in all your films, which a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them sort of have some tech narratives, how do you use sort of like humor and surprise, and what role do those play in sort of getting a serious message across?
Boy, pretty critical. I mean, underneath that question to me, and Caitlin spoke to this, one of the core precepts and before I was a producer, I was a film executive at 20th Century Fox. So a lot of time, a couple of hundred movies, lots of decision making over what to make, what not to make, with whom, why, all that stuff. Fundamental to that process is relatability. The first question you ask about any story you're going to tell is, who's it relatable to? Is it relatable? Or is this just something I'm interested in? And that's probably the most important vetting you do. Alongside that becomes, who is your audience? Who is your target? Who are you trying to reach? And I think these are the questions that, as I've heard various of the people here talking about the difficulty of communicating about cyber and telling that story, I think it's kind of the same. I think for cyber, it's not the focus on the keys, it's the outcome, right? It's like, what is the consequence of that guy on the keys? That's what's relatable. That's what will get somebody to sit up and take notice. Wait a minute, you mean they can cut off my power? Right? As somebody who lives in Malibu and has the power cut off a lot, I can tell you that's a bear. So it's the kind of thing where I think it's bringing it back to the human tactile level. And for the messaging piece of this, I think you guys have a very tough job, much tougher job than anybody in Hollywood, because your messaging is so inherently complex. There is no one demographic, there is no one threat, there is no one facet. So you actually have to find messaging that will suit the different demographics you need to communicate with, and it's different messaging. So within that, you're then going to have to prioritize, because currently the only message I hear is death, doom, despair, gloom. Just turn it off.
Yeah.
Right? It's just overwhelming in terms of its nihilism and its scare you tactic. And I think getting past that towards how, not unlike Caitlin, what you were talking about, the simple things you can do, but also the why, right? That can improve people's lives, and then figuring out who it is you're most intent on reaching and focusing those messages and building on that, not unlike we do in a marketing campaign. When we start a film marketing campaign, you start with your first idea. You're just introducing the premise. And over the course of a 6-month campaign, you've all seen different trailers, different commercials, pushing different facets of the story, building out, if you will, the relationship the audience has to the potential experience and why it is that it should be for them. And somewhere in there, it probably will segment. And what you'll see on Nickelodeon will be different than what you'll see on CNN, because you're going to different demographics and trying to make an appeal in a different way. I think those are tools that are pretty critical to what, and probably you're already using, but are pretty critical to what you guys have to do and will be doing in the future.
Nicole, let me come back to you on that. I mean, you're now producing these podcast series, so you too have to be concerned about 3-act structure and storytelling and narrative and, and some of the marketing that Hutch is talking about. So, and by the way, congratulations. I think your first season has award nominated, at least, yes? Yes, great.
Yeah, it won Best Documentary Podcast. We're up for Sundance. It's very exciting.
Woohoo.
No, let me tell you, the earlier panel, someone on the earlier panel, maybe it's Brett, was talking about how, Volt Typhoon is the most critical threat we face in this space right now. Couldn't agree more. I decided, and I did not think it was getting covered well by the mainstream media. So I decided, okay, I've been out of this for a couple of years. I'm going to go back to Chinese cyber espionage and walk people, be the donkey, walk people through how it's morphed into this critical infrastructure pre-positioning. Here is where you connect back to people on the steps, because we talk about Volt Typhoon, it is an APT threat, it's in our water, it's in our ports, it's in aviation, it's in our pipelines. That's all very real now. We don't need to use any FUD there, that's scary enough. How are they doing it? This was really the key message of the podcast, season 1. How are they doing it? They're converting our home routers into botnets and then directing those botnets in these orbs at water treatment facilities in rural America. And that comes back to why it's so critical to change the default passwords and to use router brands that we recognize. And that's what the podcast was about. Like, I'm going to walk people through just how much IP was stolen, but it's really urgent that they understand their role in the solution here. And why are they doing it that way? They're doing it that way because if you are a water treatment facility in Indianapolis and you see some suspicious traffic coming from a home down the street, your first thought's not going to be, oh, this must be the Chinese military, right? So it was really important to me to break that down for the everyday person. It's actually really important as a nation that we break that down for the everyday person, and we just haven't done it. And so that's why this conversation is really important.
And you're doing this with your next season. What's your next season about?
The next season is on North Korea. And the reason I'm doing it on North Korea, not to pick on 2 Asian countries in 2 years, is because the remote IT worker issue with North Korea, oh my God. I was speaking on a panel a couple of weeks ago in New York City. I mentioned the North Korea IT worker issue. If you're not familiar with this, it's way more widespread than you think. I got off stage, I'll tell this story in the podcast. The CISO for one of the largest staffing agencies in the United States came up to me after, and he said, Nicole, we got a call from the FBI that our laptop was in one of these laptop farms run by an American on behalf of North Koreans. And we learned that we had staffed hundreds of North Korean agents at Fortune 500
And they're
companies.
masquerading, just explain in case people aren't
These
aware.
are people masquerading as Americans taking remote IT jobs at Fortune 500 companies across the gamut, and they're really good. They're really productive. Once they're caught, sometimes people don't want to fire them because they've been so good. They're taking those paychecks, and actually in the podcast we go do this, where in some cases you can trace those American paychecks to not just the North Koreans' weapons programs, but to Russia's weapons programs in Ukraine. So just like that is a threat where it's really important that whoever is doing HR at these companies understands how this threat has morphed, understands how it's playing out, and then understands steps they can take to mitigate it. But what was interesting, he said, not just hundreds of agents at these Fortune 500 companies, but 6 at his own staffing agency. I mean, it's way more pervasive than we think. So that's just another one where I think it's really urgent we break it down. And in doing the podcast, I told the production team and the sponsor, I'm sorry, but I'm going to be a nightmare for you, because it's so hard to tell these stories that it's really important to me that we think cinematically about how to tell them. And with a podcast, you know, it's all audio, I said, I'm going to be on you about the music and the sound design and really painting the room for people and making it something that's almost pleasurable to listen to. Otherwise, there's no point in doing this at all.
Yeah. I'm going to come to Caitlin next, but I just want to say, Hutch, there are so many movies in everything she just talked about.
I know.
Or you're working on them. Good. Well, you'll have to come back next time and when those movies are out, or I guess it takes longer than that.
Do the
but-
premiere here.
Yeah, we'll do the premiere. Oh, that's a great idea. Actually, note to staff, that is a really great idea. So Caitlin, I also just want to talk about storytelling tactics, and you use sort of humor and lightness around some pretty heavy topics. So talk about sort of what's your technique, as they would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so you have to figure out who your audience is. That's like number one. But for me, my audience is everyday people. And everyone asks, so like, what's your main audience? And I'm like 55% women, 45% men, and it's even across the board between 18 all the way to 64 plus. So it's very even, and I don't really go to, you know, the more tech issues. Like, I'm not gonna report outages for corporations because corporations already know that's happening, and you have your own internal conversations about that. What can normal people do about it? And you can make it fun, because honestly, I think cybersecurity is fun. I don't know about anyone else, but there's ways to make it more fun and relatable. And every single time I make a video, there's 3 things that I need to talk to them about, and I have to fit it within a minute and a half or less. and I talk really fast, so I've been really mindful of talking slow. But the first is like what's happening and how that impacts them. Like, what does that mean? And then the second is, okay, now that it's impacting them, like what could that mean for their future or for their loved ones or anything else? And then the third is, what can you do about it? Every single video has to have that. So it needs to be relatable. It needs to be simple. I'm not using any tech jargon. I don't even use smishing or quishing. Like, can we please get rid of all this weird tech jargon? Like, no one cares. and they're confused. It makes it even more confusing, and it makes it even more like hard to understand. So it's a scam, right? Or it's identity theft. It's not quishing. Like, you clicked on an email. Like, let's make it really simple. And it's again, it doesn't have to be confusing. It's just straightforward, relatable. Let's get to the point. I value people's time. We also like to doom scroll. I like to doom scroll all the time. So how do we get them to stop in that first 3 seconds? And it's making it relatable to them. And then what happened and how they can fix it, all within a minute, usually under a minute, but sometimes it's a minute and a half. And people just appreciate the trust and transparency of it, and it builds for a trusted brand. And I think that's what everyone needs to start doing, even in corporations. Like, you don't need to put out a really long email about everything that happened, because, I mean, who reads your corporate emails? Yeah, there's literally no one raising their hand in this room. No one cares enough unless you make them care or make them see that it's relevant to them. And you can bring light to it. You can make it fun. Obviously, if it's like really, sad, you don't need to make everything fun. But you can make things fun, simple, and understandable and digestible pretty easily, and you don't have to waste their time. So it's really relating to your audience. My audience is everyone outside of tech. Like, I get the nitpickers because sometimes I make it too simple, and they're like, this is making it way too simple. It's way more complicated than that. I'm like, they don't need to know that.
Exactly.
They don't need to know how complicated it is. They just need to know what they need to do right now, next steps to protect themselves. So it's just simple, fun. Sometimes I do a little dance because why not? And it just makes it easy for everyone to relate to.
So all three of you are storytellers. You're storytellers of a different kind. We have a room full of people here with us at the Reach, and we have an overflow room that is filled, and we have a lot of people watching us online now and later. They are not, most of them are not professional storytellers, and yet many of the people here are in critical cybersecurity roles. They need to be able to communicate. What can we share with sort of so-called amateur storytellers, professional cybersecurity experts, to help them understand how to convey a message? I want to ask each of you to do that in our remaining minutes.
I can start. I think I kind of covered it, but like, we don't have to be very technical. Like, we can kind of get rid of the tech jargon. I think it also depends on your audience. Like, who are you speaking to? If you're speaking to someone that wants the technical, go for it. But if you're speaking to like the average user, like, remove the tech jargon. Like, we all know you're smart. You're in cyber. You don't need to tell them that, like, all these crazy words. And then I think, again, really understanding who your audience is in order to convey the story and like what the outcome is. Like, figure out what you're trying to tell them and why it's important. Like, why are you even talking to them? And then once you understand that, you'll be able to explain it in a lot simpler terms.
Yeah, and I would just say, just using different words here, just get out of the myopia. And by the way, it's so much worse in the industry with the Gartner acronyms. Oh my, it's just it's terrible.
Every company has their own acronyms too. It makes it even more complicated. Like, let's just not.
Yeah, get rid of all of the acronyms. The best thing that came out with my book was the fact that when the book came out, I went to Ladies Who luncheons and on the Upper East Side. I had lawyers for Cyber Command tell me that the book became required reading for the lawyers before they could get read in at Cyber Command. That's, I think, my bar, is it has to be relatable and understood across different audiences. Otherwise, you're losing someone that you don't realize how important that person is. And one thing I always say about cybersecurity is that the biggest misunderstanding is that people think it's a technology problem. It's not. If it was a technology problem, we would have solved it 20 years ago with firewalls and antivirus and intrusion detection systems. The reason we couldn't solve it, the reason why it keeps getting worse, is because it's only a little bit a technology problem. It's actually an incentive problem, an education problem, a people problem, a resource allocation problem, a culture problem. And once we understand that, we'll start making headway. But we're not going to make any headway until we really get that. And I think that really, really starts with the message.
You know, not to repeat, I think they've hit on a lot of the essentials, right? The relatability in the audience. I think the other piece that I would offer from, you know, sort of a cinematic perspective, there's a kind of a rule one in screenwriting. And it gets forgotten a lot. You guys will know the examples, I'm sure. But rule one is show it, don't tell it. Right? And I think this is a particularly valuable one for you, because I can say, as somebody who is not cyber sophisticated, my eyes glaze over really fast when you start going through the technical details of these issues. And I think in terms of that relatability component, if you're in a position to tell the story in short form, that PSA, show it, don't tell it, because you put it automatically in personalized circumstances. I think that really helps you understand viscerally why this matters and who it connects to. And actually challenging to do it on podcasts or do it, but the truth is I think podcasters have found the way to tell stories incredibly vividly, you know, with taking the time to unpack them and making us feel them. I think the other thing I would push, and again, I'm going to borrow from, you know, when we make a film, we go into this weird isolation, and you develop the screenplay, and you find somebody to finance it, and you cast it, and you build out a budget and a schedule, and you go off and make it, never having seen a foot of it really cut together until you're finished. And you're hoping against hope it's going to come out the way you think it will. It never does, by the way. And then you go through editing, and you reshuffle the deck, and again, hopefully you finish something that reflects the intentions that everybody set out with, or maybe even exceeds them. We then go out and test the movie. We take it out into the world and we put it in front of an audience. And that audience is not a Hollywood audience. That audience is just a regular viewer. And they tell us, we didn't understand a word. We hated the ending. We don't like that main character. Why did he do this? That's a dumb way to start. You get a lot of feedback you may not want, but it's really, really helpful to understand how to meet them where they are. Right? What are they understanding about what you're saying versus what you think they're understanding? And I think given the complexities of this industry and the relationship you have to the general public, obviously not to the people within cyber, but not in cyber, that's probably a useful tool for anybody trying to tell the story. Go out and talk to the people who are actually living the problems you are trying to solve. Listen to their language and then communicate that back to the company or that back to the people you're hoping to influence and make change. That's, I mean, it's painful, I'm not going to lie, but it's really, really valuable to get that objective perspective and realize, okay, we have a problem we didn't think we had that we now have to work on and adjust. Yeah. And every film you've seen, every single one goes through that process before it lands in the marketplace. Sometimes you can't solve the issues. You know the results of those.
Yeah, the main character is the main character. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. You all provided fantastic tips. Hutch, Nicole, Caitlin, thank you so much, and thank you to the audience.
Thank you.